Follow Brett on Twitter at Brett_McMurphy. And Brett, before we start, thanks for coming on. And how are you and your family doing through all this? Everybody safe and healthy?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Doing good. So far so good. A little stir crazy like everybody else, but just waiting eagerly for life to return to normal, whenever that may be.
Well, there's no doubt. I think we all are on that one. Brett, we've talked about this quite a bit. College football in college sports is dependent upon college football. No season in college football is Armageddon for so many of these programs. What are you hearing about how a season, when a season, will take place?
Well, I reached out to all 130 athletic directors last week, and basically asked them how optimistic they were for the upcoming season to be played in full, and if not, if it started late, what are some of the options? 112 of the 130 responded. The number one thing is nobody knows. I'm sure as you guys and all our listeners are, nobody knows when we're going to get the all clear. Nobody knows when we get the green light and we can go and things can return to normal. So until then, all these athletic directors, all these commissioners, they've got these contingency plans on how to get the football season in during the academic season, but they can't do anything until they know, when things can get back to normal. So it's not that there's one better plan than another. It's all dependent on when things can return to normal. There's plans to play conference-only games. There's plans to play the season over 2 semesters. If you can't start till October, November, finish in February or March, there's plans to move the season to the spring. But the main thing is it's critical for college athletics, athletic departments to get some sort of the season in to recoup some of this football revenue, because that's how critical it is to these universities. And it would have some weird consequences if you move the season to the spring. It would conflict with the NFL draft. It would be going on the same time as March Madness and basketball. I mean, there's a number of factors. The season would end, and the next season would literally start in a couple of months. But that all takes a back seat to the fact you got to get the season in. And they're just hopeful they can't. One AD summed it up best. He said, if we don't have a football season this year, we're blanked.
Well, and Brett, that's where I wanted to go. Of the 112 who responded to you, did any one of the 112 say, I don't think we're going to have a season? Because we are with you. Financially, this would be Armageddon. That even if this takes place in February and March, we think there's going to be college football because, well, these athletic departments are in an arms race and they got to pay the bills.
Right. No, nobody told me. I said basically rank it from 1 to 10. With 10, definitely we will be playing, and 1 we will not be playing. Nobody actually ranked it lower than a 5. However, but I reached out to them. It's probably been 2 weeks now. So let's go back 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, the Olympics hadn't been canceled. The U.S. Open hadn't been canceled. They haven't canceled summer school at Ohio State, Oklahoma, Duke, a number of other universities across the country. So that was 2 weeks ago. And also, a lot of ADs told me privately, look, I want to be optimistic. We'll figure this out. We'll get this done. And they kind of admitted, look, if you weren't it wasn't an anonymous poll, but if you weren't compiling this information and putting it out, I may have given you a lower number. So certainly I'm sure if I circled back with them now 2 weeks later, I'm guessing their outlook would be different. What I think is going to happen ultimately, college athletics has a different challenge than the pro sports. And because of that, I don't think we're going to have college football in the fall. I think we'll be able to get it in the spring, but I don't think we'll see it in the fall. And for one simple reason, I don't think the university presidents in a couple of months are going to be able to say, look, to all of our tens of thousands of students from all over the world, it's now safe to come back on campus and take your classes here on campus. So because of that, I think they'll take online classes in the fall at most of the major universities. And if you can't have the student bodies on campus, you won't have the student athletes on campus, and you can't have football. So I think that's why we'll end up playing in the spring. Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully we can play in the fall, but I'm just these university presidents are usually pretty cautious. They're not risk takers. And one more example, a source told me there was a group of 5 conference presidents. Again, this was 2 or 3 weeks ago before we had all these cancellations. So that far back, a group of 5 conference president mentioned to another group of 5 president that they should go ahead and cancel the fall season and move it to the spring. And so, who knows what that person's thinking now, but I think it's, again, unless we have a magic bullet, unless we get a cure, a vaccine, whatever that is, that government officials, health officials, society in general deem it's okay, where we can get out of our house, we can be in groups of more than 10 and all that sort of thing. I'm afraid we won't have football in the fall.
Brett, when you talk to all of these athletic directors, and we know financially what it's going to do, did you mention any of them, talk to any of them about what they're going to do with their own departments? Will coaches have to take pay cuts? I mean, with no games, they're not going to get the network money that they were going to get. Has any talk of Nick not making 8 or Jim Harbaugh not making 5 or 6 or whatever it is? Has any of that talk yet come up with athletic directors?
Well, nobody got specific with me, but I think it's pretty simple to see what's going to happen, and it's not going to be the same at every school. You mentioned Alabama, Michigan. Those guys obviously will be in a better position than, say, a Louisiana Tech or a San Jose State. But the reality is, if again, depending on if there's no football or depending on if there's just 50% of the revenue they're used to having, I think you're going to see a lot of Olympic sports eliminated overnight at a lot of these schools. You could see some of the smaller group of 5 schools, even at the FCS level, that drop football. It's unfortunate, but that could happen. One of the models is conference-only games. If that happens, then the group of 5, the FCS, they lose those big $1 million paydays when you go play on the road against the Power 5 team. Ultimately, the athletic director is going to walk in the president's office and say, last year we had 60, 70, $80 million in revenue for our football program. This year we only have half that or a third of that, whatever the number is. And the president, okay, how can we reduce cost? And AD can say, well, we can cut 5 sports and that'll take out a big chunk of it. And then that's a decision the president's going to have to make. I can't sit here and say they're definitively going to get rid of this sport or that sport, but that's some of the choices they're going to have to make. And then obviously a lot of things go into that. You get into Title IX. Do these sports that 10 or 20 years ago they were club sports? Do they just return to being club sports for a few years and then return as NCAA sanctioned sports at these universities, or are they cut entirely? I don't have those answers, but that's some of the decisions they're going to have to make. And you can tell how serious it is when Iowa State just a little over a week ago their AD announced that their football coaches would take a 10% pay cut and they would put a 1-year hold on any bonus or incentives to save $4 million. That's pretty significant. That's a Power 5 school. That's not a group of 5 school. So everybody's going to get dinged a little bit or a lot. It's just dependent on how much the difference is from last year and obviously how financially solid the athletic program is.
Brett, do you think, there are those that have wondered that we're going to have one more, whether it's realignment or one more division between the haves and the have-nots? And I don't know if you're somebody who subscribes to that thinking, but Mark and I have always thought that we were going to get to a day where there was going to be about 65 or 70 schools. and then the others were going to drop down to FCS. That they were just going to say, there's really no business doing 85 scholarships. We might as well just do 65. Do you think that this could, like in Major League Baseball, they're thinking this could cut the draft forever from 30, 40 rounds down to 5, and this could cut the minor leagues, which MLB has wanted to do, cut 30, 40 teams out, and that they may use this as the incentive and the driving force to do it. Do you see this potentially being what drives college sports to the next big divide?
Yeah, I think you're right. We've got 6 years left on the 12-year contract with the college football playoffs, and there's a number of the Power 5 leagues whose media rights deals expire in the next 3 to 6 years. Look, the gap between the Power 5 and the Group of 5 was growing bigger and bigger every day, even before this virus hit. So, I agree with you guys. I think what this does is it accelerates that process. How it looks on the other end, I don't have any idea, but I do agree. And I don't necessarily know if it's going to be 65 or 70. It may be only 50 schools. It may be, some of the Power Fives don't survive or drop to the Group of 5 level or FCS or whatever that division will be called. But yeah, I think ultimately that this will accelerate what was going to happen eventually anyway. And it's unfortunate, but yeah, you're right, because financially, there's so many factors. You guys ask great questions, but then as soon as I answer one, I have 10 more questions for myself. Without the ticket revenue, how are these schools going to survive? Donations, which is a big part for every university. People financially are not going to be in the same position because of the economic situation that everybody's in. So they're not going to be able to bail out some of these programs with donations. So it's a number of factors. And again, there's not a right or wrong decision on what happens. It's ultimately going to be up to each president to determine how important it is for these athletic departments and, financially, if they can continue to operate like they have in the past. But you're right. Some of these monster salaries in the past, maybe they've hit their peak, and they'll now go down a little bit. Will we see smaller stadiums because people won't want to come out in as large of numbers as in the past? Maybe this will change the way we view games on television, because I recommended to some athletic directors, look, if there's some way you guys can play games and there are no fans in the stands and your students are just taking online classes only from campus, however you're going to do that, you guys need to play every day of the week. You need to maximize your TV. You don't need to play 90% of the games on Saturday. You have a quadruple every night of the week, kind of like the MAC does it in November. So there's a lot of things. Everything that we've known about college athletics the previous 10, 20, 30, 40, how many ever years is drastically going to be changed when we get out of this. And how it's going to look, I don't know, but I agree with you that it will accelerate this split between the power schools and non-power schools.
Brett, thanks for your time and your insight. And you're right, as you're speaking, we're coming up with more and more questions, which we had the time to ask it. Stay safe. Be well, you and your family, and we'll talk when hopefully there's an answer or two.
You got it. Thanks, guys.
Brett McMurphy of Stadium. He's a college football insider. Follow him on Twitter, Brett with 2 T's _ McMurphy. Brett McMurphy